Today's show is brought to you by TestCube. Are flaky tests slowing your Kubernetes deployments? TestCube powers continuous, cloud-native testing directly inside your Kubernetes clusters. Seamlessly integrate your existing testing tools, scale effortlessly, and release software faster and safer than ever. Stop chasing bugs in production. Start preventing them with TestCube. Check it out at testcube.io/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. Hope everybody's November is continuing to go well. And another weekend perspective show. Glad to be with you all today. And you know, we joke around a little bit if you listen to the show for the last couple of years. It feels like November is kind of always the month of surprises in our industry, or at least has been the last couple of years, especially as we dive into some AI stuff. You know, a couple of years ago, we had Sam Altman allegedly getting fired from OpenAI, and then some things flipped around and he wasn't fired. And then last year, end of November, 1st of December, Pat Gelsinger was fired from Intel. And so we started saying, oh, well, 2 data points makes a trend. What's going to happen this year? And, we'll see if anything does come around in November, Thanksgiving timeframe, or roughly that timeframe, December timeframe. But the other thing that's been interesting the last couple of weeks to kind of dig into, and I think Ben Thompson, for those of you that follow the show, Ben Thompson, who runs the Stratechery site company, they do all sorts of wonderful analysis and podcasts and writings and so forth, had an interesting piece this past week called "The Benefits of Bubbles." And I think the most dominant conversation that's been happening over the last 6 months or so, especially in the AI space, as more and more money piles in and stock prices go up, and giant numbers are thrown around, numbers with B's and T's at the end of them. Is are we in a bubble? And what is the size of the bubble? What's the timing of the bubble? All sorts of those things. And Ben wrote an interesting piece in which he kind of looks at where we're at, and he says, yes, we're absolutely in a bubble. But the reality of bubbles is that bubbles in some cases can last for a long time. In some cases, they can burst immediately, as we've seen in other cases with, say, like the internet bubble and the real estate bubble and so forth. But he made an interesting point, and I thought I would dive into this in today's show. Is really one of the things that happens when we are in the middle of bubbles is there's a realization, not necessarily a coordination, but a realization that a lot of things are going to happen in order for us to sort of evolve from the place that we were to this sort of next expected stage. And oftentimes the next expected stage really isn't truly understood until we start to get into it. And so I thought it'd be interesting to sort of dive into that a little bit as to, the difference between what we're seeing right now, what we saw even like the beginning of the cloud era, in which so many things are happening at the same time. Because in order to get to some of the things that are being projected or forecasted or envisioned, this isn't one thing has to change, one or two things has to evolve. This is almost like everything at the same time has to evolve. And it does make our job difficult for all of us. Anybody who's involved with AI, whether it's building or managing or forecasting or planning or analyzing, it's an interesting time. So I thought I would dive into that right after the break.
Global finance is being reshaped, and it is powered by digital infrastructure that never sleeps. On Interconnected, a new podcast by Equinix that explores the hidden infrastructure behind our connected future, they lay out the trends that make tomorrow's banking system possible. Project Liberty Institute CEO Sheila Warren, Wormhole Foundation co-founder Dan Reeser, and Gauntlet CTO and co-founder Ri Chiang explore the ongoing progress of decentralized finance. Listen on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, want to dive into, a couple of different topics, a couple of different perspectives that I've been listening to the last couple of weeks, and kind of, so as we cover AI quite a bit on this show nowadays, try and synthesize some of them and put them into some sort of context. Because obviously, it feels like there are a lot of things happening. People are trying to figure a lot of things out at the same time. Like I tell a lot of people, like every couple of weeks, things feel like they potentially could change significantly. And I read an interesting article by Ben Thompson, wrote an article called "Benefit of Bubbles." And what he basically said was, anytime there is these big technology shifts, there are subsequently, especially oftentimes, sometimes at the beginning of them, sometimes in the middle of them, some sort of bubble. And at the time, we speculate about the bubble. We speculate about timing of the bubble, how big the bubble will be. Should you be in the market? Should you be out of the market? All those sorts of things. And he said, but oftentimes what happens is we don't necessarily recognize the long-term importance of what the bubble means, and how things coming out of the bubble oftentimes become even larger than they were before the bubble, because certain things happen that then unlock other things that start to take care of a problem that the pre-bubble thing didn't fix, and so on and so forth. And what he was kind of digging into was, if we looked back, for example, at what happened with the internet bubble. Yes, there were a lot of maybe bad business models. Yes, there were some technology limitations that held things back and so forth. But then, you had, a bunch of, bad fiber, not bad fiber, good fiber that went unused but was built and so forth. Basically got built for free for what became the next generation of the internet and stuff that took off and changed what happened with the internet from sort of the 1.0 to 2.0 things. And what he kind of got into with the AI stuff was, he said, it'll be interesting to see how the economics work out, because there isn't necessarily an immediate thing that would happen if a whole bunch of companies crash, for example, because GPUs have short depreciation cycles, and the speed at which they tend to grow or evolve is you use them for 3 to 5 years, and then they're sort of not as useful as they were. This isn't like fiber, which you can leverage for 15 or 20 or 30 years and so forth. So, he was kind of drawing some parallels. Well, the thing that was sort of interesting about his discussion, and I thought what might be interesting to dive into today, is, he said the other thing that happens with bubbles, and we're seeing this happen right now with AI, is the forecast and the projections and predictions and so forth are right now feel like very big, right? I mean, all sorts of, things that feel sometimes very big, sometimes very crazy, everything from like, we're going to be, finding new cures for diseases that we never could before, to, half white collar workers won't be employed in 5 years, to all sorts of things in between, right? And the byproduct of that is, whether or not any of those are correct or partially correct, in order to get to where they need to be, there is a lot of things that have to evolve, have to grow, have to be built, that just don't exist the way they exist today, right? And maybe a great way to sum that up, there was an interview done by Brad Gerster, who is a sort of famous VC. I'll put a link in the show notes, where he was interviewing Satya Nadella and Sam Altman of Microsoft and OpenAI. And he sort of said, well, let me ask you a question. Asked the question to Sam Altman. He said, hey, you guys right now are, projected to be about $13 or $15 billion of revenue. And it appears that you've made about $1.3 trillion worth of, purchases in the future for data centers and GPUs and power and all these sort of things. Like, how do you square up those numbers for me? How are you going to be able to grow from from 13 billion to 1.3 trillion just to cover your expenses or whatever? And it got a little bit contentious and so forth, but it kind of highlighted in a really simple term that the company right now that many people perceive to be leading the industry are making, 10x, 100x bets of what they even have foresight into over the next 4 or 5 years. And yet you look at what's available to help them, whether, again, it's in data center space or in GPU capacity or in power availability within certain regions of the world. And you go like, those things don't exist today. And yet you're building this business model based upon all these sort of projections and expectations and so forth. And I think what I took away from Ben's thing, which was very interesting, was, as we see with many technology shifts, it's oftentimes things move somewhat, while there may be a big jump, they feel like they move somewhat slow. The expectations start to grow fairly high. And maybe they grow slow for a couple of years. And then sort of all of a sudden, things sort of speed up and take off. And if I look at this, and I built a little timeline that's in the show notes, end of 2024, the question was, what is ChatGPT, right? It pops out in Thanksgiving, November, around basically this time 3 years ago. a year later, it was, well, what can Gen AI do for us? Generative AI, as far as jobs and skills and what's possible. Those are the questions we were asking sort of in that first year and a half. Then by the time we got to 2024, it was, well, what are the alternatives going to be in the marketplace to, sort of market leaders in terms of OpenAI and NVIDIA, or OpenAI/Microsoft and NVIDIA? We were asking, where is Google? Where is AWS in this big picture of things? Where are the alternatives to the OpenAI/NVIDIA kind of win-tell, market domination? And then by the time we get to 2025 and throughout 2025, we've been asking all sorts of questions, right? What's the role of open source in AI? What do AI regulations look like? And we've seen those fluctuate wildly over the last, year and a half based on, what we know, and politicians getting involved and regulatory groups getting involved, whether it's in Europe or in the US, or it's, at a state level like Canada or California and so forth. Regulations are becoming more and more of a conversation in lots of different ways, and there's not necessarily a through line that's going through all of them. But we're looking at, what do AI partnerships look like? DeepSeek came along in March and seemed to upend the marketplace in terms of what you could do on smaller chips with smaller models and so forth. Some of that buzz has died down a little bit, but it's show that there are alternatives out there. People have been talking about AI agents all year long. People have been talking about AI funding all year long over the last year plus, and how that's growing. AI power has now jumped into the forefront. Maybe it may become the conversation of 2026 in terms of both Andy Jassy in the Amazon earnings call this past month, as well as Satya Nadella in the Microsoft earnings call, both said, hey, our limitation is not chips at this point. It is power. It is the ability to, be able to power all of these chips and build out data centers and so forth. Satya went on to say that, they have chips that are just sitting around right now. They're not actually, overutilizing the ones that they haven't, because a lot of them haven't been turned on yet. So, power and those challenges are becoming more and more involved. And then finally, even in the last couple of weeks, we're seeing more and more discussion about, hey, where should the government get involved? Whether it's the U.S. government or the Chinese government or the Saudi Arabian wealth fund, what should be the role of governments in AI? Whether it is, creating funding, to drive research, whether it is, taking equity stakes, or putting money into certain companies in order to be able to generate enough expected demand to be able to let them go off and build chips and fabrications to be able to do that. Whether it is, companies beginning to ask for government backing and government guarantees on things, as we've seen with OpenAI. Whether they did that or not, there's been some conversation that that may be happening. And so, I think 2025 has sort of proven to us that it is the beginning of a lot of different things beginning to happen all of a sudden, right? That sort of, things go slow for a while, and then all of a sudden, all sorts of things happen at the same time. And we look at this, there was an interesting podcast I listened to recently, Dave Vellante over at Cube Research. Dave, somebody who I've worked for in the past and I have a lot of respect for. He was doing a bunch of research and just analysis and doing the math on, what it would take to build out the power necessary for, so much of what's being, talked about. And he's like, we're going to go through a 10-year cycle of, not only the chips that are being built and depreciated, but then the next generation of chips that come along that need a completely different footprint, or a much bigger footprint in terms of power and cooling and so forth. And then the next generation, he's like, we are in the beginning of a 10-year cycle to be able to get to, the footprint that's needed even for some of these speculations that are out there. And so, it's going to be very, very interesting to watch the things that are happening in parallel, the things that are happening very, very fast, whether that is, new, the things around agentic, as people, because again, it's in software can go very fast, whether it's the things that can happen in sort of medium speed around the chip level, whether that is capacity, or whether it is, new designs around chips, or whether people are able to figure out ways to better utilize the chips that we have, so that we're not having to constantly only be chasing the latest and greatest chips. And then finally, the things that take, much longer times to plan for and to actually build. So data centers, power capacity within organizations, the ability to figure out, well, where will power capacity be, and what sort of additional networking has to happen in order to be able to drive latency and data movement and so forth. So I think we're beginning to see what the bigger picture is starting to look like. We're beginning to see where the areas are that are moving relatively fast, the areas in which we've got interconnectedness between industry and government, industry and regulations, where we're seeing open source playing a role in things, where we're seeing VC fundings playing a role. And so I use this as only a kind of a primer, but also a heads up that if you're following this space, if you're involved with this space, expect everything to go really fast. But at the same time, start to think about, and we'll be doing the best we can on this show to start to put some framework in place, some scaffolding in place to kind of give you a sense of like, where are the fast things moving, where are the medium speed things moving, and where are the longer term things moving, and what's driving those different things throughout that. But I think this year more than anything, and we'll cover a lot of this in our year and wrap up shows. But like this is the year in which we're beginning to see the bigger picture of all the moving pieces that will be impacted, changed, evolved with AI, whether they all happen in a positive way, and if some fail, if some move faster than others, what are the things that are going to impact that? And then I think more importantly, where do we start to see some disconnect between the things that have to move fast and new innovation happening versus the things that move slow and maybe don't catch up, don't happen at the same rate of evolution that some of the other ones do, and how much that changes the landscape of what we've seen. So, for example, the analogy we use all the time is, the original part of the internet was built with very proprietary hardware, proprietary software, sort of closed systems. Sort of the second phase, once the bubble burst, was built upon much cheaper software, free software, open source, much cheaper hardware, community-built things, and very different ways of interacting with technology, interacting with software, interacting with devices, and so forth. So, I think we will. Right now, we are. It feels very parallel to that early days of the internet, where things were very expensive, very limited to the number of companies that were driving what was going on there. I think we will see as ingenuity and so forth is the mother of invention. That we'll see some new breakthroughs happen. Maybe DeepSeek was just the sort of scratching of the surface this year, and we'll see a dozen sort of DeepSeek moments happening in 2020, 2026. So, anyways, with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Hope everybody's having a good weekend. Hope everybody's having a good week and a good November, and lots of shows to wrap up the year, lots of wrap-up shows to finish after that. A lot of interesting guests still coming up, but hopefully you're all doing well. Hopefully your Q4 is going well if you are in the side of the world in which you're trying to wrap up your year. So with that, if you have any questions and we can help you out, please let us know. show@thecloudcast.net. We'd love your ideas for new topics for the show, new guests for the show, and so forth. So with that, we'll wrap it up, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.